Excuse me, but can you record, please?
Doing it. Welcome back. We are GDD403. That's problem solving with data structures and algorithms. And we are in the winter semester 2023 at Canada College, and it's week 3, part 2 of our broadcast and recording. Okay, so again, all the time we'll be recording. The stuff we talked about earlier was just our conversation. In the middle, we had a bit of a conversation with just the class here between recordings. The first one was our orientation, and this one is where we're actually going to do some stuff, some tools, installation. And the first tool that I want you guys to handle that we're talking about is our Git tools for Windows. So this is the link. So please, again, go to git-scm.com. This is the one I want you guys to go to. And if you already have done this, it's okay. And I kind of challenged you guys earlier and said, go to command prompt, and in your command prompt, can you see Git for Windows working? The way you would do that is to test it is, again, you go to your little start button here, and you just type in CMD, right? CMD is your command prompt. It'll come up, and then you'll have this, this tool right here. What you want to type is, again, is git ---- version. And if you come up with something that looks like this, you're good. Okay, even if it's an earlier version of Git for Windows, you're good. But if you're not good, and I suspect most of you are not, then you need to download this for Windows. And you can download it more than one time. So notice that mine is 2.39.0 and the new one is 2.39.1. In order for you to do this, I highly recommend turn off your terminal right now. So close all terminals down. Make sure your Visual Studio is shut down. Make sure if you're using Visual Studio Code, it's shut down. Okay, you don't want that to be on as well. Again, Visual Studio Code to me is the best little editor for web development, in my opinion. But okay, so that's what you do. So then you start downloading your tool for Windows. So let's download it together, and I'll show you the options that I want you guys to use. So I'm going to download it for 64-bit Git for Windows setup. That's the one I want. Okay, so I'm going to save that in my downloads folder, and let's continue. And then once I have that ready to go, I'm going to click onto it and run the installer. Let's do that together. So this is the installer. Now, when you get the installer coming, if you've already got Git for Windows installed, like I do, it's going to say something like only show new options. I'm going to show all the options. So I'm going to uncheck this one. Okay. And then I'm going to click next. The next option here is some of these. So additional icons on the desktop I included. Windows Explorer integration for Git Bash and Git UI. I've got that. Git large file support, you probably won't need. So I recommend unchecking that or leaving it unchecked. Associate.git star configuration files with a default text editor, leave that alone, checked. Associate.sh files, I agree. Check daily, I don't recommend. But these ones, add a Git Bash profile for terminal, check. Make sure these two last ones that say new are checked. Okay. And it says current selection is at least 293 megabytes. That's okay. Let's continue. Next. It's going to ask you for your default editor for Git for Windows. And I'm using Visual Studio Code, but you can choose any one of these. It doesn't have to be that, because we're never going to probably use our editor to edit our profile or anything like that. So whatever you want to use here that matches one of these, you can certainly use things. Even Notepad doesn't matter. And you have Notepad, everyone has that, or WordPad if you want to use that. But you choose one of those that you want to use, and we'll continue. I'm using Visual Studio Code. Again, I think it's a really good little editor. Next. The next one is, how do you want them to create a repository for you? And I'm going to say, let Git decide. That's my thing. Okay, so it's going to decide what the repository naming is going to be. For now, it's main. It used to be master. Master is not a great word to use these days. And so we're moving away from it, and we're making it main. Here, if you override it, then you can make it whatever you want. And for larger organizations, they might have another standard that you might want to use. But for us, it's going to be this. Next. Adjust your path environment. I'm going to choose the last option, not this one. But it says use Git and optional Unix tools from the command prompt, right? That's the last option that I'm going to use. I find that I have additional tools like other commands, Unix-like commands that I can use that are very similar to PowerShell. And I can use all those in the command prompt. Click next. And then for these next two, SSH and the OpenSSL library, I'm just using them as their defaults. That's the top option. And then click next. And then for the next one, configuring the line ending conversions, I'm just leaving the default option again, the checkout Windows style, commit Unix style line endings, and then click next. And then for the next one, instead of using min-tty, which I don't like, I'm going to use Windows default console window, the command exe, which is what I'm going to be doing for mine. So that's the one I'm going to use. Click next. For this one, I'm going to keep the default. This is the default fast forward or merge option up here. And then click next. Now, this is an important option. Ensure 100% you select this radio button here, Git Credential Manager. You must have this one in here if you're going to use Git for command prompt. And the reason for this is because it configures who you are and it keeps track of all this kind of stuff, right? No, it will not. It will not mess you up. In fact, if anything, it's just going to make it easier, right? Remember that any version of Git is going to work the exact same way. So if you have a previous version, you don't have to do this thing. All right. So if it's working for you and if it's working on command prompt, you don't have to do this part. You can just cancel out. Right. So if you're feeling nervous about it, okay, but it shouldn't have any effect is the answer on anything that you're doing. Okay, let's go next. This one is configuring extra options, and I recommend checking both of these options, right? So enable file system caching and enable symbolic links. You should check both of these. But the next options where it says experimental stuff, typically, like I said, I don't use experimental things unless we're using, Unity Hub. That's the exception. Here, I would leave these unchecked. I don't want to do any experimental business with my Git and GitHub. Okay, and then click install. I'm going to do it too, right? Because even though I have Git for Windows, it's going to remove my previous version of Git from my system and then install the latest version of Git from my system. And it's not going to hurt me in any way. I haven't found any kind of negative side effects for this, and it works just great. So please do that. When you're done, I don't need to see release notes. I just want to click finish. And the way to test this, and this is where we can come back to you, is if I do command prompt, again, CMD, and then if I go here and if I type in git ---- version, then it's going to show me the latest version, which is 2.39.1.windows.1. Are you with me? You can use a check mark as a reaction if you want to in Zoom. That might be an easier way of doing it than just putting yes on the commands on the chat there, or a thumbs up is fine. And if you're not with me, if something went wrong, put an X, right? So that way I know I can help you out with this kind of installation. I want to go and do that every time. So if you have a problem, Scott, what's the problem? Then I can kind of do it. And actually you can put X on the reactions as well, right? Let's talk about that. What's the problem, Scott? Maybe you want to come on the mic and we can help you out. For path, do you want the bottom one? Or the recommended? Let me just go reinstall that again. I don't mind. So I will.
I can explain it a bit better. It's adjusting your path environment. The top one is use Git from Git bash only. Then the one down, which is recommended, is Git from command line and also from third-party software. And the last one, which is the one you use, is use Git and optional Unix tools from command prompt.
Okay, so I'm just going to go back to the entire thing. So this is let's just go back. So when it comes to your path environment, it's going to be the last one. Okay, that's the one that we want you. Okay, and the rest of them is bundle SSH is the top one. OpenSSL is the top one. Windows style, check Windows style, commit Unix style is line ending is the top one. The bottom one for Windows default console window, and the top one for fast forward or merge, and then credential manager, yes. Check those two for extra options and don't check these ones, and then click install. And that should give you everything you need for your stuff.
Okay, I got it.
All right, so so now what I'd like you to do is make sure that you can do this. Can you do this? If you can do this, we can continue, right? If you can't do this and it gives you not recognized, then we need to fix you. So please let me know if you get an unrecognized command in command prompt. Please do that now. Anyone have a not recognized, command not recognized? Because we need to fix that problem. If you do, or if you do another installation in the future that you do, you can fix it by using your environment variables. And I'm just going to talk about it because this is the direction I would recommend. If you type in advanced system settings, view advanced system settings. If you ever type that, in your Windows 10 or something like that in Windows 11, you're going to see this environment variables thing. Okay, I don't want you to do anything here. I just want you to watch. Okay. In the environment variables, there are two types of environment variables for you guys as developers. One of them is this first part, which is the user variable for me, right? And then there's the system variables. System variables are for everybody. Okay. So there are two environment variables we care about. The path variable, that's for you as a user, and the path variable that is for your computer, for everybody, right? Don't mess around with these things, for no reason, because without the path variable, some functions will not work properly on command prompt anymore. In fact, some programs will stop functioning altogether. Why? Because the environment variables are used to kind of target, some programs and how they're going to work. So example, things like, I don't know, MongoDB, if you have that installed, or some Android stuff, or whatever you have, there's links and kind of it points to different parts of your tools. And so same thing with Git. Sometimes Git tools need to be put down here as well. So here's, if you're using things like GitHub Desktop or something, it might be here. And a lot of times you can fix your problems that are here. Example, if you don't have C:\program files git bin, that could cause you not to show for your command prompt not to work properly if somehow this did not get included in your environment variable. So this is a way to fix it. Yeah, I understand. Justin, that's exactly what happens, because you have to go into your environment variables and fix it manually. All right, so, but again, sometimes what I do is, and just as a hint, is I also put it inside my path here. And this is there's more stuff in here. And the reason why I put it in here, and this is where this latest stuff just came from, the stuff I just did. Notice it says, C:\program files git command. You kind of put that there and a bunch of other stuff. So sometimes you need to do it in both places. And I'm recording this so you can fix it if you have a problem. None of you reported that you're having a problem. Don't do this, right? Because again, danger, Will Robinson, this is going to blow up. If you, if you change anything that you don't know, it could stop things from working. Again, it's not impossible to fix, but why bother, right? So that's the first thing. That's the way to fix it if I had to. Now that we've got Git and Git installed, please make sure you have your GitHub repository, all right, that you're kind of putting together. Okay, so on GitHub, and I'm just going to go here. Let's use a incognito tab for now for this one. So I'm going to go here. I'm just going to put in GitHub. Then it's going to take you here, right? GitHub was originally, just a little bit of history, originally owned by another company, now owned by Microsoft. LinkedIn is also owned by Microsoft. And so is LinkedIn Learning. And that was once called lynda.com. But anyways, Microsoft owns GitHub, and I think they've done nothing but improve it. I think it's pretty good. Some people were nervous about Microsoft owning it because it's a big company. And everyone uses GitHub for, it's one of the most popular tools out there for sharing code and a lot of other things. So please, if you haven't had a chance to do this, please sign up for GitHub today. You need to do that. If you don't have a GitHub account, sign up. It's a pretty straightforward process. And you can put in things like, you can make your own stuff that you're going to put in here. I have a GitHub repository, and I'm going to ask you to include me as a collaborator later on when we do things today. One thing that I can also do is sign up as an organization. Let's see if I can do that for you guys. right now since we're talking. And so please, if you haven't had a chance to already, again, what I'd ask is please sign up for GitHub today. That's what I recommend. Okay. So one second, I'm just putting my stuff together and then we'll be good to go. So that way you're not, I'm just using my authenticator here just to make sure I log in properly. One sec. And then we'll be good to go. All right. So mine, where I'm gonna share all my stuff is gonna be called Canadore College. I don't know. I always do this every single time. By the way, I own George Brown College, Centennial College, Ontario Tech University. I own all those, right? Those are all my organizations. They require us to use our school emails for our GitHubs, just so everyone knows, but that is only for those that will be using it. I recommend you use it. I think it's a good thing. For Ubisoft, they use something called Visual Assist. All right, so Visual Assist. So that's what they use. Again, it's not free to use. You can try it for a bit, but Visual Assist is another tool that Ubisoft finds is really good. It's got a lot of great integrations, Visual Assist. So that's another one that you might want to do, but you can see that the standard license is $279. And I haven't seen a kind of a license that is an educational license for Visual Assist. If there was, then I would be using that. All right, because and the reason for this is because Visual Assist is used by Ubisoft and by a lot of other kind of game dev companies. But for us, ReSharper is good. Any kind of Visual Assist tool is kind of a good thing to do. So that's what they use. They use Visual Assist. All right. So again, I'll be sharing my stuff here on your, and over the next couple of weeks, you're going to see there's going to be repositories that are going to be shared with you here on this, kind of link. I just made this just now. So here it is. So right now it's empty, but you're going to see we're going to put stuff in there together as I work with you. Today is going to be one of those examples where I put in my my first repository here. But again, I'm completely familiar with this, and I want to talk about how we're going to use it today. So you guys said that you kind of learned how to use GitHub, but you don't know exactly, maybe you don't use it all the time the way it's supposed to be used, and so on. So let's talk about a couple things here. And I'm going to use a drawing tool for our whiteboard, which is going to be Sketchbook Pro. Okay, so let's do it. So GitHub and Git, what is it? Why do we need it? And I'm going to assume for 1 second that you've never used it before, even though you have, right? And I'm doing this so that way everyone's on the same page with me. So this is one tool that we're going to be using every single time we do something, in-class exercise, assignment, midterm test, final test. It's all going to be with Git and GitHub the entire time. So I need you guys to understand how to use this stuff and why. So let's suppose, again, I'm just going to do a little bit of theory. We have our files. This represents our files and folders, let's say on our system, a bunch of files here. And one of the challenges we had way back was, how do we share files with somebody else? How do I make what do I do? I can put it on a USB and I can give it to you, right? Or maybe I'm going to use Google Drive. Terrible idea, by the way. And one of the problems we run into with Google Drive and with all those things is versioning is a thing. So imagine if I'm starting up my project and I start off my project in this version 0.1, and version 0.1, it makes some changes. I make it 0.2, right? And I go 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. Nice, right? And you share it on Google Drive and you have all these versions. But what do these versions mean, right? What did you add? What features did you add? What bugs did you fix? None of that says anything in version 0.1. Doesn't say anything, right? So we want an efficient way of capturing our versions, the changes that we made to our files and our folders, and so that we can share this information with others to know our development path, right? And also for us to kind of be able to step back to a previously working version of our code, you know, as an example. So what we want to do is we want to create a, you know, kind of a local snapshot. So usually when we make a snapshot, for Git language, it's called a repo, okay, or a repository. So we want to make here a local repository first, or repo for short, okay. And the local repository is something that we want to capture, you know, kind of like an instance of our code base. That's what we're going to do. The commands to do this, because we're going to talk about Git commands now, and I want you guys to learn them over time. I'm hoping you will. Again, it's going to be a little bit agnostic for me. I don't care how you put it up on GitHub, as long as you meet the requirements. If you want to use a tool, if you're more comfortable using a tool, all the power to you. However, I recommend as developers, you learn the commands. Why? Because then you know the underlying thing that's happening in GitHub, and you're not going to be like, what happened there? How do I do this? And and why did it do this? And why did I lose my files? And how do I step back? And this way you'll know. So in order for me to make a local repository, which is, you know, kind of like a snapshot, foundational snapshot, almost like a baseline from my files, I need to use the following command with GitHub. It's going to, or Git, I mean, it's going to be git init. That is the command. All right. So git init, what it's going to do is it's going to start off, it's going to create a hidden .git folder. Okay. Let's go back to our files for a second. So let's suppose I'm just going to make a brand new, you know, kind of project here, just to play on our desktop. So I'm going to make a brand new one. We'll call it Canador. It is. And in Canador, I want to make a test folder. Let's make a test folder. Here's test, right? And in my test folder, I want to make this a Git repository. Okay. One thing to know about Git and GitHub, it will not keep track of empty folders. So if you have an empty folder on Git or GitHub, it will be ignored, right? So nothing to troubleshoot. It's just going to ignore it. Okay. So we need some kind of file in there, you know, to do it, you know, to put something in there. So let's just make a README file. So to make a README file, I'm going to go into my test folder, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go new, and I'm going to make it a text document, but I'm just going to rename everything, including the line ending. So it's going to be readme.md, and press enter. It's going to ask you, do you want to change the extension? I do. And I press yes. So readme is a typical file that you might see. MD stands for Markdown. And right now it's 0 bytes because there's nothing in the file. Let's put something in there. So I want you to double click on this, and whatever your favorite editor is will come up. If I double click on this, for me, it might be Visual Studio Code. For you, it might ask you, how do you want to open this file? And you might choose an editor that you have your choice. Notepad, Notepad++, Visual Studio Code, hell, even Visual Studio could do it. So here in my README file, I want to put a hashtag, and I want to say something like test project. Okay, that's all it's going to be. And some kind of thing like that that says this is a test project for GDD403 in the winter 2023 semester. Something small. Okay, simple, save. All right, so now I can close this off. You can see that I have a README file. It's about 1 kilobyte. Yay, right? And so here I am with my test folder, and I want to make this into a repository. So just like I said, I want to do that first command. So I'm going to pull up my command prompt. Here's my command prompt, and you can find that by going to your Windows button CMD and going in here. And then in your folders here, all you need to do is on your command prompt, type in CD. CD stands for change directory. So again, it's a bit of DOS. Disk operating system is what it was called back in the day. But this is kind of your operating system command, CD, change directory, space. And then you want to be able to navigate to this folder. And normally you'd be like, where is it? I got to look it up. About forget that. Just drag and drop the folder into your command prompt like this. And when you do that, it's going to show you the entire navigation kind of path, right? And then press enter. And what that's going to do is it's going to position the command prompt so it's looking inside of your test folder. I'm going to pause there. Are you with me? Or anyone that's not with me, X, please. If you can't do it somehow. Check mark if you're with me, X if you're not. Thank you, Justin. And again, you can find those reactions on the bar. Okay, that's a good thing. Thumbs up is okay. Anyone else? I got Daniel, good. Rin. How about the rest of you guys? Getting there. Thanks, Morgan. All right, thank you for that feedback. And Matthew's there, good too. Okay, so this is good. So let's take a look now at inside the test folder and see what happened. So I'm going to just go into my operating system here in File Explorer, and let's look inside the test folder. Inside the test folder, you're going to see, well, there's nothing, right? Because we just got the README file. I want to follow up with my command. So back over here in my command prompt, I want to do git, here's the command, init, git init, and then press enter. Okay. And again, you don't see immediately anything happening over on the right side. But if I was to look inside that folder now, you can see that there is, for me, a hidden.git folder. That's what git init does. How do you see hidden files and folders? Again, I'm assuming that you don't know. If you do know, that's good. Here's how you do it. View, and if you go to, you can choose file names and extensions to be checked off, as well as hidden items. I don't use item checkboxes. I don't like that. So file name extensions and hidden items, if you check these two on, you'll see this .git folder. And the .git folder is basically going to keep track of all the changes for your repository, okay? Repository being your folder that you're developing in. That's what we're calling it. Almost like a snapshot of your baseline, okay? And that's what we've just done. So git init takes a snapshot of the baseline of your folder structure, okay? Let's continue. So back to this. So now that we have our git init, again, it created a snapshot. So basically a hidden.git folder. So this will say it creates a hidden.git folder, right? That's what it does. And that hidden.git folder is what where it's going to store everything, you know, for all of our changes anyway. The next command, I want to add all of my files, or I want to choose the files that I want to add into my my repository. The way it works is it does file tracking, right? And there's something called the staging area. Git keeps track of files that you mark as things that you want to keep track of. There's files you may choose not to track. For example, things like larger files that like image files, or maybe even a model or some kind of proprietary image IP that you don't want to put up on GitHub for some reason. You don't have to track everything, but typically we do as developers, right? So the next command that you're going to learn is git add, and the git add command, whenever you have a tool, actually, in any case, whether it's Git or some other tool, usually it comes with some kind of action verb. So the tool name, that's the tool name, followed by an action verb, add, remove, you know, whatever it's going to be, push, pull, right? Those are commands that we're going to do. They're actions that we're going to take. So git add, and then followed by what you want. If I wanted to add the README file specifically, I could put something like readme.md. You could be very specific, right? Or instead of barring this, if you don't want to do that, you could just put something like dot. Read git add dot is the typical way we do it. Dot means add everything, any changes we made. And that's typically where I start everyone with, git add dot. So that's the one I want. And I'm going to take this as that's the next command that we're going to use, right? Git add dot. What does this do? Well, if I go back to my command prompt, let's do this again. And if I do git add dot, then what's happened is it's taken my README file and added it to the staging area. The staging area as an invisible ownership. Okay, this is what I wanted to get to. Detected dubious ownership in repository. What this means is you need to detect, you need to, to add in or configure your name, and you need to configure your email address. So there is another step that you can take, and that's why I was hoping that we were going to get to this. If you git config username and email, this is the little link for this. Here is what you need to do. So to set your username, you need to do git config -- global username. And then after that, okay, you can put in quotations, whatever your username is, right? So the username as it appears in GitHub, that's what you want to put in there. Okay, so that's the first thing. I'm going to put that in the chat for you. And the other one that you want to do, the other command you want to issue, so again, in quotations, you want to put your first name and last name. And then the second one you want to issue is your email address. Those are the two things you need. So this is the second piece of configuration. If you have the same error, git config -- global, and then user.email, and then next to that, the email as it appears on GitHub, not your personal email, unless that's the one you used, not your school email, unless that's the one you used, but the one that is on that you used to create your GitHub repository. That's what you want to use. Okay, so please use that one. Okay, Justin, try it again and see what it does. Does it fix your problem? Because if it doesn't fix your problem, that might be something else that's going on, but it should fix your problem.
Working through the commands now.
Awesome. Let me know. I'm not going to continue until everyone's good on this one. Because if you can't do these commands, then later on, it's not going to work, right? What we want to do. Let me know when you're ready.
I did both of those commands and it's still giving me the dubious error.
Really? So you did both those commands. So the way to check is if I do git config, right? And then it'll say, it says that dubious. We have to look that up too. I haven't seen that exact thing. But let's take a look here. If you go git config and you want to notice that there's global, system, local, and whatever else you want to look at. These are the actions you can get. So get the value, get names, and so on. And, show scope and default and a bunch of other stuff. These are all the things that you can do with git config. Git config is your global configuration, your profile, right? And sometimes what we need to do is you have to use your git credential manager, right? So that might be the way to fix that. Let's see if that is the problem. So if I say, and you said fatal, let's look it up together. Detected dubious ownership. Right, if I do that, it will come up with that. Git submodule update. Here it is. So how to fix that problem? It's nice to have a solution built in with the error message, but what does it mean? And it says so in our case, the user's ABC folder was created by the system and it is owned by whatever, not the user. Where are you putting it?
Currently on my SSD, my external.
Okay. Have you switched to that drive? Is it a D drive or is it an E drive? What is it?
It's my H drive.
H drive. Okay. So do you see on your command prompt H? Like, does it say H as a command prompt? What does it say? If I was going to switch to my second drive here, then I would just type in, D, right? D is my secondary drive, my data drive, right? So do you see this when you're doing the commands? If you're doing it from C drive, it won't work. And also make sure on your, wherever you're doing it on your SSD, that it's not some kind of system folder. It's like another folder you made, right?
It's
that might be
in H:/college/GDD-74/algorithm/GitHub. But it's an external drive. Is that possibly the cause of it?
typically not. Try locally. Try if you can put in a local drive for you. See if it does the same thing for you. It might be a permissions issue. unusual, but it could be. But make sure everyone who doesn't have, if you might get a problem with that first thing, because that's your credentials that I talked about earlier. So I don't think it's that. Dubious ownership means that you may not have access with what I'm seeing here to that account. But because it's talking about, access. The other way to do it that might fix you also is to be going as administrator, make it going as an administrative command prompt. That might be the fix for you. Okay, so again, to do an administrative command prompt, you go here and you type in CMD, just like normal, and then see where it says run as administrator. You can do that, and then what it'll do is it'll come up with a different command prompt, and it'll be in a different spot. But this command prompt will allow you to do almost everything destructively on your system. Again, be careful, but this is what you might have to do this. Try that instead. Okay. Let me know if it fixed you somehow.
What was the git command again? I restarted it in administrator.
The git command, first you navigate to the right folder, because you have to navigate to the right folder, right? So again, if I'm going to do the command prompt, then you're going to go here, and then what you want to do is you want to do, let's go back to this, CD space, and then drag and drop your folder in there. So you drag and drop this, and then you can do, you already did a git init, and it had no problem, or did it give you a problem with that too?
The git init was fine.
Okay, so then all you have to do is git add dot. That's what you do. So you do something like git add dot, and then press enter.
Still the same. I'm gonna try moving it onto my actual C drive.
That's weird. That is not normal. But anyways, that's it could be. It's possible. Anyway, so then if you don't have that problem, and most of us looks like, unless someone else has that problem, do not, then the next step is, and what it did is it kind of marked the files, all your files for that particular repository, and put it in a specific spot, which is the staging area. And that staging area lives inside of the hidden.git folder. That's what it is. It's invisible to you. Okay. But what we want to do now is, after we mark the files, we want to create a friendly name for the snapshot, and that's our commit. Okay. So again, let's go back to our diagram. So here I want to make a friendly name for the snapshot, and that's what we want to do. So that is git commit. Commit means I want to commit these files as it's the external drive. Okay, good. I'm glad that you figured it out. I'm so sorry about that. Git commits, and then -m for message. You need to use this, right? And then follow it up in quotations with whatever you're doing. Typically, when we first set up a GitHub repository or a Git repository, we need to use one of two types of commits as a convention. The first one is initial commit, or you can choose, and don't put this in, these are the options. It's initial commit or first commit. Okay, those are the two that you can use. I'm going to use initial commit. That's my preferred way of doing things. Okay, but first commit is okay too. So again, this command is the thing that's going to create a friendly name for your snapshot. So git commit -m initial commit, and what it's going to do is it's going to be able to, it's going to almost create a container with a name that's going to have your stuff here. All right, so let's do that. So again, back in here, I'm going to say git commit -m and then initial commit. Yeah. And it says one file changed, 2 insertions. Okay. So, and it says here's the name, here's the file that was added. The 2 insertions are because I also added in a folder. I have a folder and a file that I added to my Git repository. That's what I did. Okay. So that's this part. And if we go and check our operating system now, again, we don't see any difference. Okay. But so where do we go from here? So now that we did this, we have our first commit or our initial commit in our local repository. And this is fantastic. Back in the day, you weren't working with anybody else. You can continue chugging along. And the cycle of updating your repository looks like this. You would do exactly these 2 commands, git add, git commit. git add, git commit, git add, git commit over and over again. And anytime you put a git commit the next time, you're going to put a different message in there, which is fix this, added this, remove this, found this. You're going to tell Git, you're going to kind of almost like note any changes you made. Here's when you make commits. Get up for the bathroom, make a commit. Have a coffee, make a commit. Fix a bug, make a commit. Add a feature, make a commit. Keep doing commits. It's not going to hurt you to have a lot of them. Through the development process, my expectation of you for this semester is you make a commit anytime you make a change within reason. Okay, and I mean that like changing the name of a variable, don't need to make a commit. But if you added a function to a class, make a commit. You know, that kind of stuff is probably a good thing to do. Why? Because you can always step back, right? I like it. But I'm a big Star Trek fan too. So you know, so yeah, so I mean, it's up to you, but I think you have to be reasonable, and a lot of times organizations will have a standard that they ask you to kind of you know, to adhere to. A lot of times it's like, you know, especially when you leave for the day, make a commit. When you come in from the day, try running things, make a commit, right? And the reason for this is because we can always step back, right? So one thing we can do here is here's the process. Let me just talk about this process. So if I'm going to do another commit, it would be like this: git add dot, right? Or whatever file you want to, if you want to be specific. I'm not specific a lot of times. Then git commit -m, and let's say, for example, I added, you know, and I'll put it in square brackets, this particular feature, whatever this feature is, okay? That's what I normally do. And then after I do this, the next piece that we haven't covered yet is I usually push it right to GitHub. That's kind of a cyclical way of doing things over and over again. So I kind of have this as a cycle. I'm going to kind of label this my commit cycle. All right, this is kind of how I do it, right? And the commit cycle basically includes these three commands over and over again, okay? So I'm going to do something like, you know, git add dot, git commit, git push, git add dot, git commit, git push. You're going to do that over and over and over again, okay? And so we've done a local repository, but I want to put this repository for testing for you up online, and I want to show you that process. So let's do it together now, all right? So let's describe, like we said, GitHub as, let's describe GitHub as this, you know, ooh, that's cool. Let's describe GitHub as this, you know, oh wow, an ugly drawing with my mouse. This fancy cloud, and you can see here that this is GitHub. This is what, it's a cloud service. So it's software as a service, right? That's what it is. And it provides you, where'd it go? I said GitHub is software as a service. That's what that is. And that was weird. And that's what this is. It's a cloud service that's up there. One thing to note is, even though you have a Git repository locally and you have a GitHub account, there's no connection, right? The only time you connect is whether you push or pull. In order for us to make that first connection for the first time, what we need to do is we need to create a remote. That's what it is, okay? So a remote, I want you to think about it. Again, this is just terminology for you. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. It's just terminology for you, but a remote is just a connection between our local repository and our GitHub repository. And I want you to think about the GitHub repo here as a snapshot of what you have locally. It is not like Google Drive. So one of the misconceptions that I get sometimes is, it's kind of like Google Drive, right? It's nothing like Google Drive. Google Drive, you have direct access. GitHub, you don't have direct access. So what you do with GitHub is you take a snapshot of your files, and then we take that snapshot and we literally send it to GitHub. That's what you're doing here. So you know, you take that snapshot, and that snapshot is up on GitHub, and that is your GitHub repository. So your GitHub repository is different than your local repository in that they're two separate items. However, we want to keep these two things in sync, in synchronization between the two things, right? So GitHub repo, local repo. The GitHub repo is separate entity. The only way we can do that is to create something called a remote, right? There's my remote. And the remote is something that is going to be provided to us when we create a repository for the first time. And it's usually the name, the URI of my repository that I made. So the name of my repository plus my account. That's what it kind of works out to be. That's a remote. The remote is not a consistent connection. You have to activate it and deactivate it with your commands. Git pull, git push, git fetch, all those things. You connect to your remote for that, okay, by default. And a couple of commands we're going to learn are git push, right? And when we do git push, that goes in the up direction. Oops. Let's do that. So this is the up direction. So we want to move whenever we do a push command, it's like an upload, right? Where we go in this direction, right? And when we're doing a pull, it's kind of like a download, and it kind of goes in this direction. All right, so that's how it works. So this is git pull. There's also a git fetch. We're not going to cover right now. All right, but so this is the way it would work. Git pull. Okay. And git pull is going to pull down the changes from your repository to your local repository, from your GitHub repository to your local. We would do this when I'm working with you. Let's suppose I do a commit and I'm collaborating with you, as another developer. I do my commits and whatever. I've modified stuff on the main branch. And then what you do is you pull my commits into your system, and now you have all the changes I made, right? That's how you do it. And so the way we would share stuff is I would push my stuff up there. This is one way. And then you would pull down my changes, to your local system, and vice versa. Okay. So, so again, what this does for us is it gives us three reasons why we want to use GitHub, right? The first reason, again, if I was going to ever test you like a quiz, if I would say something like the top 3 reasons to use GitHub, Git and GitHub, we'll say Git and GitHub. Oh, GitHub are 1, right? Backup, right? If your laptop or computer burns, it's okay because you got your files on GitHub. It's a real reason for it, right? Number 2, version control, right? It will tell you exactly what changes you made. And number 3, collaboration, right? Which is like teamwork. Okay, so that's kind of like why we use these, GitHub. And that's any version control system. That's just not Git and GitHub. By the way, GitHub is not the only Git compatible software as a service. There's others. I want to mention them to you so you know what they are. One of them is GitLab. That's becoming a popular destination. You can create your own private Git cloud, right, that you can share with other people that is not on GitHub. All right, so GitLab is a way of doing that. The other one is Bitbucket. Okay, Bitbucket. And that's another Git compatible service out there as well, right? Privately hostable that I know of, no. It used to be GitHub. That was open sourced and everything was fine. Now it's owned by Microsoft. So the answer is not that I know of, that everyone uses. And besides which, you want to use GitHub because it's the most popular kind of repository sharing service ever, across all types of software, not just game dev. Although game devs don't use GitHub in their in Studio. Okay, a lot of times if you're in a studio, like a larger studio environment, you wouldn't use Git and GitHub. You do something called Perforce. Okay, so that's the main one that they use. I'll mention that as well. Perforce is, I would say, still the de facto standard for game dev. Okay, there's no one else that that uses it more than game developers, I would say, for sure. And the reason why people use Perforce is because they have something called a check-in and check-out system. You can have a private Perforce server, and usually kept in-house a lot of times. That has nothing to do with the cloud. So it's kind of all your proprietary IP is kept in-house, and that way they own it and it's not in the wild. The biggest problem with Git in GitHub and Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, AWS, and any other cloud service, it's there. It's on some other person's server machine. And you don't know how corporate espionage works. And so these people are all weird and nervous, and as they should be. And what they do is they keep all their IP in-house, per force, right? Now, are we going to do per force? Hell no. They have completely different naming conventions. So depots instead of repos, the way the things work is different, and one system doesn't really talk to the other one, like GitHub and Git. You have to set up a whole other thing. We're not going to do that, and I'd probably be the only one that's going to teach it to you. So it doesn't make any sense. And you're going to learn it at the studio that you're going to work on, because they'll have their proprietary server you're going to connect to anyway, and it's going to be just fine. Once you know any version control system, when I was talking to the people at Ubisoft, I'm like, are you okay if they know GitHub? And they're like, yeah, any version control system. We need them to know version control. And so that's why I'm showing it to you. That's why I think it's super important for you guys to know, and I'm including it in our course, okay? So yeah, so is Perforce the de facto standard? Yes. Are we going to use it? No. And because it requires a server. One day, maybe a Canador, maybe Abby and I will set up a Perforce server. And if that's the case, yes. For now, no. Okay, so that's not how it's going to work. They do have one at Georgetown. All right, so let's move on to the next part. So it's not Bitbucket. Bitbucket is owned by Atlassian. Atlassian is not a bad little company. It makes something called Jira. And if you're going to do project management, if you're going to thinking about being a producer in your lifetime as a game dev, Jira is your friend. Everybody at Ubisoft and at Rockstar and a lot of all those places, most places across the software engineering world right now, use Jira as their agile project management tool of choice. Okay, if they've taught you anything else, there's other tools out there. Trello is a good tool for small teams as well. But using something like Google Drive is unacceptable, right? Or anything like Excel or something like that is just dumb. We don't do that. We use Jira or Trello a lot of times for smaller teams. There's other tools too, okay? But tools we use for what we're doing, okay? Again, Matthew, if I was going to talk about the software engineering world in general, like not game dev, I would say GitHub. Git and GitHub would be the best tool you can possibly use. It's the best open source community tool that we would use, even though it's owned by Microsoft. They still treat it like it's open source. It's free to use. You can do a lot of stuff with GitHub for free, and it's great. And everyone knows it, okay? If I was going to say this, like I said earlier, the best for game devs, if you had your own server, Perforce would be the best one to use, okay? But we're not using it. Okay, so Jira, it's made by Atlassian, the same people who made Bitbucket, who also have their own private Git service. That's one. And the other one, of course, is GitLab, which is its own thing. It's almost like private GitHub for yourself. You can make your own private GitHub like server, if you will, locally. And you can also use the cloud. So that's kind of how it works. So back to this then, if we're talking about doing this situation, how do I make a repository? Let's do it here. So I'm going to go into my kind of my Canador College kind of account, and I'm going to go kind of add your repository. And the new repository is whatever I want it to be. I want to specify that it's on my Canador College account. If you have an organization, I'm using organizations. Clearly, you're going to just use your personal account. That's fine. Notice the default from my repository is private. Please keep it that way, right? For me. And we're going to try this test right now to see if you guys can do this thing, right? So repository name, I'm going to make a test because you're going to make a test repository too, right? Hopefully, we've been doing this thing so you can test it out. This is a trial run before we get into the real work later on, okay? So here's my test. And I'm going to keep it private. Please do that with me. And then notice it says there's some other options here. Add a README file. We have that already, so no. And by the way, typically I leave this unchecked. Add a gitignore file. That's a very useful file to have. And notice it says there's a gitignore template that you can download and use. For example, you can use, if I wanted to use something for Unreal, could I look up an Unreal template? There's an Unreal Engine template. Could I look at something for Unity? right? So if I look up on Unity, there's a Unity template, right? And there's other templates. We're going to ignore this. We're not going to have any template at all. We're going to keep it none, and we're going to make our own template eventually. So what is the gitignore thing as well? It's a separate file. It is called gitignore. That's what it's called, right? And the gitignore file is just like a text file that basically indicates to Git to ignore a file or a folder. So let's say, for example, I have a builds folder in Unity, or I have a library folder in Unity. I don't want to put my library folder up online. I want to have a gitignore file that basically indicates which files and folders it's going to ignore when I push it up to GitHub. Because, for example, in Unity, the library folder is regenerated when you launch Unity, right? So you don't have to put it up on GitHub, right? And sometimes there's files and folders that are proprietary we don't want to put up on GitHub. So we can ignore those files, okay? So let's leave it the same way. Licensing is the same. You can choose different kinds of licensing if you're going to make a product. But for now, we're not making a product. We're just going to do this. Let's just click Create Repository. When we do Create Repository, it's going to show, these steering instructions. These are steering directions for you, right? And notice we did a lot of this. Git init, we added, instead of a README file, we did git add dot, and they use first commit, not initial commit. That's okay. What I want you guys to do, because we've done most of this, is just grab these last 3 lines of code here, copy them, okay? And then I want you to go into your command prompt and just right-click. And if you right-click, it should install those last 3 lines of code. So let's try this again. So I'm going to go here, copy them, and then right-click, and then it'll put all those commands in there for you. And then if I press Enter, it's going to push my stuff up to GitHub. For you, this is critical. For you, what it's going to say is, it might ask you to log in for the first time. Please, whatever you do, make sure you put in your credentials as they appear on your GitHub account in there to log in. When you log in for the first time, if you followed my instructions to install your Git for Windows, it will remember your credentials and you'll never have to do that login again, okay? If you don't do that, and if you don't check, there's a little check mark that'll probably come up and says, remember me or whatever. If you don't do that, it'll always ask for them. That's a big, kind of a big pain in the ass for me. So please don't do it that way. Do it so that you can just push up to GitHub, okay? And that's what it looks like. It kind of did those 3 commands. Git remote add. Remember we said that there's a verb. Remote is the verb, add. So we want to add a remote, okay? What is the remote's name? So the remote itself is just a link, right? And that link is called origin. This origin is a naming convention. It is just did you get that? Really? Even after you did your local repository? You shouldn't get that, Justin. That is really weird, like super weird, right? It should be, I mean, again, as long as it's local to your C drive and it's not in some fancy folder, like a system folder or something, you shouldn't have that issue. That is really weird, right? We have to look up that fix for you. There must be a fix for your system. It could be something that you have to do in your command prompt, something else, or in your in another system. Okay. All right. So again, Git remote add origin. Origin being the name. This is the friendly name of your remote. So this is the name that we're going to choose, right? You can put whatever you want in there. You don't have to use origin. You can call it, your name if you want. But this is the remote, and the remote is just a name for this link right here, which is https://github.com/ the name of your account, which is this one, right? Followed by the name of your repository, which is this part. And it's cut off, but it actually says .git, right? So that is the way you make your remote, okay? And let's clear that up for a second, clear all drawings. No problem. Whatever makes sense for you, Mark. You shouldn't do everything at once, but right-clicking should make it so that you can just copy paste. You can also copy paste individually or type them in. Okay, good. Thanks, Justin. I think you just have to run as admin from now on, Justin. I think there's something up with your system. By the way, it could be some installation you did for another class. It could be something that you installed, maybe a mod. Sometimes mods do a lot of funny things, but these are the things that you may have to do. All right, so now that you've added this one in, then the next command is branching. So branching, what that is it's saying, we want to create a new line of development. So Git isn't just commits. It's also a bunch of commits in a branch. So the way they use a tree-like system, talking about data structures, right? And let's suppose each commit is a node in the tree, right? So let's suppose this is a commit. Okay, I'm just using this rectangle to represent the commit. And let's suppose this is your first commit. And then what you do is you go along and you make another commit. You maybe add something else. And then maybe you add something else and something else. This is kind of a linear linked list, if you will, of commits. So one kind of goes to the next one and then goes to the next one. And you have this like thing that looks like a linked list or sequential nodes. And each node represents a snapshot of your files. That's kind of what it's like, right? And so here we can call this is the branch, right? So here's a branch. We normally call this the main branch. And the main branch is, there's a couple of things you should also know about branches. Each of these is a commit. So this is a commit, each one of those little nodes. So, and there's the head of the branch. So this is the head, is what it's called, right? I'm making it in caps because that's what it'll look like in your system too, is the head. So what happens is, this is your local branch. You can develop locally, right? You can do commit locally. And then when you push remotely, you want to synchronize the heads of your branches. You might have your branch remotely and a branch locally, and you can work remotely, add a bunch of commits, and then your remote is behind your local branch by X number of commits. And so what you need to do is push. When you push, you synchronize. You actually add those commits onto the branch that's remote. That's how it works, okay? But sometimes what we want to do is we want to work in a number of branches in a repository. I have my main line of development, my main branch, and let's suppose I want to do a bug fix. A couple ways to do that. I could create another branch. So this branch is not going to be in the main branch at all. It's kind of almost like another line of development that will not affect the main branch. We can keep pushing on the main branch. We can specify that. So if I did that, if I made another line, here's my other line of development. Let's suppose this is the bug fix branch, right? Here it is. I keep adding a couple of commits as an example. And these commits are all linked together. And then finally, when I'm ready to put them back, I merge them back into the main branch. Okay, this is how it works, okay? So this is typically called, let's say this is a bug fix or feature branch, whatever that is. And we name it the same name as the bug or feature that we're fixing or adding, all right? So for example, I'm adding in, jump mechanics for my game controller, then I make it the jump mechanics branch, right? So I put that in there. And so I develop my jump mechanics and I don't affect the main branch at all. And when I'm done, I merge it back into the main branch. We do something called a merge, right? And the merge is tricky. This is where people have a lot of issues when we merge this commit. And what happens is when we want to merge it with the main branch, we have something called merge conflicts, right? And the reason why is because we want to insert a node inside of this linear list, of nodes that we want to create, right? So how do we do it? Because I'm modifying files. Remember, each of these commits is a series of files that I'm creating a snapshot from, right? So if I modify a file that you and I are working on together, let's say I work on a scene and you work on the same scene, and I make a change to mine and you make a change to yours, it's the same name. Which one do I take to put on the main branch, mine or yours, or a bit of both, right? Which is some manual merging where we go into the files themselves and say, well, I want to take, I'm going to use a random name here. I want to use, this file from Justin, I want to use his file and I want to use mine for this one, or maybe I want to change this line on this particular file because I like what Justin did or Daniel did, right, on this side, and my stuff goes in here and I do a manual merge. This is actually what happens, guys. It's real, right? So, and so that merge now is both of our stuff kind of into one file. And that's the new file that's up on the main branch. The main branch has it's the single source of truth. It's the main line of development, call it whatever you like, okay? So that is what branches are. And by default, we kick everything into the main branch. That's what this is. And this line here, get branch minus M main, is basically the main branch or the default branch that you're always going to push to with your get push command. Okay, that's what it means. Okay. Next, get push. Get push, like I said earlier, is an upload to GitHub. That's what that does. Minus U is unconditional. Origin is the name of the remote we talked about here. And main is the name of the branch. The way you would read this is git push unconditionally across the origin remote into the main branch. That's what this means. Why am I going into such detail? Because, my friends, you're going to see this thing happening one day where you're going to have to use command line. It's a marketable skill you put on your resume. You can talk about it in an interview and all that kind of stuff. People want you to know this stuff. All right. It's not something that just Tom wants you to know. Okay. So then once you have this stuff that you did, you kind of push it up to your repository. What does it look like online? If I go back to my repo now, this is what my repo used to look like when it's empty, right? But if I refresh, right, you can see now that my repository looks like this, okay? And on the top right, I have this little link here that I can go to that shows one commit, and it shows my initial commit, when it was done, 27 minutes ago, right? And also a unique commit number. That's what this is. If you look there, the commit number is quite long. It looks like this big, all right? So that commit number is a hash that's been created, and it's usually done, it's unique in that it uses the day, the time that's elapsed from 1970, a little bit of my credentials, who am I, who is, what repository that I'm connecting to, what's my name of my account, and it kind of creates a random hash and puts it in here sequentially, so that way each one of these things, each one of these commits is completely unique from every other one, okay? That's what it is, and it's pretty long. So this commit number, FC76057 is the short number. I can actually see this locally. So if I go locally, take a look at this number here. If I do a command, here's a command I can issue. I can say get log. If I do a get log command, it's going to show me the entire commit number. But take a look at this, FC76057. That's the same part as this. That indicates that we are in sync, right? So you can see here that my head is at the main branch, and origin, which is my remote, is also on the main branch. Local and remote are in sync. That's what it means, okay? Questions around this stuff that I've talked about for the last hour and a bit? We have to talk about this, guys, because maybe other professors have just told you what to do, giving you a little bit of a to-do list, and go do it, right? I'm going into such detail because I want you to be my collaborators. I want to be able to work with you on future projects, and I want you to share the same language with me when it comes to how I make things work, okay? That's what I want to, that's why I'm doing this with you, okay? Any questions? This is the basic process. Here's the next part. And again, I'm recording all this, so worst case scenario, you can always go and redo all this stuff again later on if you really want to. I say worst case scenario because I don't want you to spend all this time doing it over again. But if you need to refresh yourself, if you want to remind yourself about this conversation, you can go here and look at it. Part 2. Now that we've got that up, I want you to go into the settings folder of your repository. Again, if I was going to look at my account as an example, I might see my repositories here. So let's say here's my repositories, and you can see that I've got my test repository. Yay, so exciting. My test repository is private, right? Private. And what I want you guys to do is I want you to make me a collaborator. So I want to click on my repository, I want to go to the settings link at the top here, click on settings, please. And then on the left, it says collaborators and teams. Click on that, please. And then you'll see that you can add people, right? That's me. And the people that you're going to add is this link I'm giving you now. This is the only link I want you to use, nothing else. So this is the one I want you to use. This is my my general inbox when you connect with me. So you're going to go here to add people, and then you're going to add that into my username, which is just my last name. There's another me, right, which has a different email address altogether. Don't use him, okay? That is another thing I use for business. Yeah, don't need you to do that today, All right. I want you to use this thing. So if I type in, that stuff up here in here, if I said my email, so if I said Tsidiopoulos at hotmail.com, this is what you should see. You see my little ugly picture, and you should see this name. That's it. Not Tom Tsidiopoulos, just at the bottom here, just this little name. And if you do that and you add me, then here's what I get. I'm going to show, I'm sorry, but Rin, I'm going to show, if you don't mind, I'm going to show your thing that I got from you. This is what it looks like. Okay. So it's going to say Rin has invited you to collaborate, on this repository. Do you want to do that? I'm going to click on view invitation. This is the process, right? And then it's going to take me here and it's going to say, do you want to accept? And when I do that, I'm going to click accept. And when I accept, now I have access to Rin's repository. Okay, here's Rin's repository. I can look at their repository. I can see, the commit, right? Message, when it was done, and everything. That's what you're going to share with me every single time you do an in-class exercise or an assignment. I know when you did it, what your commit was, when it was done, the whole thing. Okay, so this way we share everything together. Every time I do a little bit of code with you, I'm going to share my repo with you by giving you the, giving you access. My repos are all going to be public. Yours are going to be private for me. So that way there's no issues. No one's going to say, well, he took my repo from me and I took his from his, blah, 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 right? It's just you. Wow, I'm so sorry, Justin. You've had all kinds of lovely trouble today. That's awesome. That's great learnings for you, right? I'm using uBlock Origin. That's what I use for my ad block. So I don't know. But it's awesome, though. It's great. Problems are way better to be had now than later on in the course, right? Because now you're getting through them, we're chomping through them, and this is cool. Ad block is okay, right? But again, uBlock Origin is free, so I choose that. Anyway, so going back to this, that's great. So I've accepted that, and I can see the other ones. I see Mark's here, and I'm going to accept Mark's. Here's Mark's repository, and I'm also going to see Justin's. Justin's has done his repository. You can see that I'm just going to go through and chomp away and at all these. Nice picture, nice image. And I'm going to go just chomp away at all these ones, and that's what I do. Now, this repository made was a test. This is not the in-class exercise for today. This is just a test. This is just us getting practice, right? After, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll actually do the thing. We'll do the lecture and the last part of our in-class exercise, and then we're going to put that little simple in-class exercise online for 4% of your final grade. It's a gift that we're going to do today. Okay, nice and easy. So, so let's do it together when we get this part done. So hopefully you've been able to do that kind of stuff and practice. Please do so now. Go into that, the part of your repository here. I'm just going to go into mine. And I'm going to go into settings, like I said. One thing also you can do is if by accident you made your repository public, you can change the visibility. So the way you would do that is if in settings on GitHub, if you scroll all the way down, you're going to see that there is a danger zone. And the danger zone, you can do a couple things. You can delete the repository if you made a mistake and start over. Okay, you can always do that. You can transfer the repository to somebody else if you're leaving a corporation or a company. Sometimes you may need to do that, right? I've had to do that a couple times. And the other one is I can change the responsibility, the repository visibility, right? So if I click this change visibility, the only way you would do this is if yours by accident was made public and you want to make it private. For me, I want to make this repository public, and you'll see the difference. So if I click on change visibility and change it to public, then all of a sudden it asks you, do you want to make this public? And I'm going to say, yes, I do, right? And then it's going to say, I've read and understand the effects of this to make it public. Are you sure? Yes. And then it says, are you sure again? Yes. It's going to ask you like 2-3 times. Do you want to make it public? And when you're done now, notice on the top here, I'm just going to use the annotation tool again, just to point this out. On the top here, it is public. See this public? That's how you know if your repository is public or private. Public, right? Public means anybody can see it across the world. It's available to anybody and anybody to see, right? And if I go back to me, then you should be able to see my public repository here in the repositories. Okay, this is where you'll see. Make sense? I know it's exciting stuff. And I know that we haven't talked one bit about data structures and algorithms today, except for maybe that little part where I said, hey, it's a linked list, right? But this is a key foundational thing that I want you guys to learn. All right. So that's why I'm telling you about it. So I spent enough time on it. And why? Because every single assignment, in-class exercise, and test we do together is going to require Git and GitHub. If I don't get a GitHub link for you, you are losing marks every single assignment. That's why I'm spending so much time on this thing. All right. You must submit a GitHub link to your repo. It's part of our things that are mandatory. Remember, the 3 things that are mandatory are whenever you do something with me, some kind of lab report for your in-class exercise, you must have that. And some kind of link to your video on YouTube. That's an unlisted link that only you and I can see. All right. You must have that. And the third thing you must have is this GitHub link. Okay. Why? Our files might be so big that for you to give me a zip archive, which is, by the way, the only type of archive I would accept. I don't accept RAR or something else, just zip, right? Then it might be too big to give me. Example, if I was to make a Unity project that might be 2 gigs of stuff that I put in there with the assets and whatever, you're not going to give me 2 gigs and put it up on iLearn, right? You're going to give me a GitHub link, right? That's what you want to do. Last thing to finish off this part is our gitignore file that we're going to add in when we make our Unity project today, okay? For now, I think we're pretty good. Any questions before we stop this part? I'm going to take 5 minutes again. We're going to go from 11:20 to, let's say, 11:25 a bit. And then we're going to come back after I do a bit of a washroom break, get some water, all that kind of stuff. And then we'll continue with the actual last part of what we're doing today. Questions before we stop? Should be fairly straightforward at this point. Again, remember, you can always go back and view the recording if something went wrong, if you couldn't do something. But sometimes, like Justin found out, maybe it's administrative rights you got to add on to your run as administrative mode. It's not uncommon, and because of all maybe other installations that have caused changes to your system. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop recording here, and we'll come back again. Absolutely, we can do that for sure. And maybe we'll do this offline, Justin, where when I connect with our Discord, I'll connect you guys, and then we can just have a little bit of meeting time, and I can show you everything you want. Okay. But it's the same process, right? Same process. And we'll talk about it. Okay. All right, my friends, let's take a 5 minutes. So we're sitting at 11:21. Let's come back at 11:26, and we'll come back and we'll have a little bit of a